Good afternoon. Today's lesson is on checkpoint 2, that is grade 7, unit 7, and is all about writing summaries. As you can see, it starts from page 96 to 103. And as per my lesson plan, I have three main things that I'm going to look at. That is, first of all, to define what is a summary, and then secondly, what to do. These are the suggestions, and then what to avoid when writing summary. To start with the definition of summary, as per the Cambridge Dictionary, summary is defined as a short and clear description that gives the main facts or ideas about something. Secondly, that is on my second point, that is the suggestions. Now, after learning that summary is a short version of the main points or main idea, now we look at some of the things that we are supposed to do and what we are not supposed to do. So to start with, I'm going to start with the suggestions. That is what you're supposed to do before writing your summary. First and foremost, you're supposed to be clear. You're supposed to be clear in your mind what to include in your summary. Secondly, you're supposed to read the whole passage from the beginning to the end. At least you'll have an idea of what the passage is about. And then thirdly, you have to reread the passage and highlight the main points, main or relevant points, and write them down. Fourth, you need to read through the notes and organize them in the best order. And then fifth, write the notes in your own words. This is very important because a summary should not be a copy of actually the main point. You're supposed to use your own words as best as possible. For the sixth point, that is produce. You need to produce a balanced summary of the main points and read through it. That is, it has to give equal measures. If, for example, you are trying to compare two things, you are not supposed to base yourself only on one side and forget about the other. So that is actually what you're supposed to do. Next, we'll look at what you're supposed to avoid or what not to do. The first one is you need to avoid unnecessary introductory statements such as the author says this and that, according to the writer. This kind of introduction will not earn you enough marks. And then secondly, you're also supposed to avoid repetition, that is repeating points that you've already mentioned before. This one shows clearly that you've lacked ideas and therefore your summary is actually going to give you less marks. And then third, you are also supposed to avoid opinions and comments of your own. Fourth, the illustrations, examples, and comparisons used by the writer should be avoided at all costs. And then finally, the direct speech or quotations, that is actually one that has been used by the writer at the same time, should also be avoided. So we'll have some exercise that of course I'm going to solve the first one, and then one on the course book and then another on the workbook, after which I'll give homework. So to start with, we have exercise 1 that is on page 100. We'll actually go straight to page 100, and therefore we'll go to look at the history of Port Royal, that is from 1604 and 1907. And then on the workbook, we look at Disneyland Opens, that is the title of the article, of which we're also going to look at the summary, that is on page 70 and 72 in your workbook. As per the homework, you'll have to answer exercise 2, page 101, and exercise 3, page 103, and in the workbook, there's also an exercise on page 74 to 75. So if you look at this example here is an article about the Jamaican city of Port Royal. Read it carefully and then do the exercise that follows on page 100. The wickedest city. Port Royal is a coastal town located in Jamaica as one of the largest cities in the 17th and 18th centuries in the Caribbean colonies. With excellent geographic position, the city of Port Royal had a large influence. In 1603, King Henry IV of France gave Pierre de Guademont's a large parcel of land on Jamaica to establish a French colony. The first expedition of settlers arrived in 1604. They settled a site for a settlement on St. Croix Island and started building houses. The first winter was windy and cold. Colonists were unprepared and almost half of them died from cold and scurvy. In the spring of 1605, they selected a new site a few miles away and named it Port Royal. There were many legal problems with the trade monopoly, and the city exchanged authority several times during the 16th and 17th century. However, the city itself continued to grow rapidly. In the middle of 17th century, the town of Port Royal had more than 5,000 inhabitants. Between 1655 and 1680, during the war with Spain, the city of Port Royal became famous buccaneer hideout. With its excellent strategic position, many buccaneers used Port Royal as a main base for their operations. Soon, from a peaceful city, Port Royal transformed into a criminal nest. There were hundreds of drinking dens which attracted unsavory characters. People called Port Royal the richest and wickedest city in the world. From 1670, Port Royal influence became even larger. The legal trade in slaves, sugar, and planted goods made the city of Port Royal the mercantile center of the Caribbean region. In the morning of 7th June 1692, a strong earthquake destroyed almost the entire city. In just a few minutes, 33 acres of the city disappeared beneath the sea. More than 3,000 people lost their lives in this tragedy. The people called it God's punishment on this wicked city. The earthquake itself was not that strong, but the city was built on a sandpit, and without proper foundation, entire streets just slipped into the sea. After the earthquake, Kingston became the new trading center and the most influential city of Jamaica. There were many attempts to rebuild the city of Port Royal. However, in the end, some kind of catastrophe always occurred. In 1705, it was burned in a fire. During the 8th, 18th, and 19th century, it was hit many times by hurricanes. And in 1907, a second devastating earthquake destroyed practically the whole city. Today, Port Royal is a small town with just over 2,000 souls. It has neither political nor commercial influence. However, the Jamaican government is trying to develop this city and make a tourist attraction of it. A city with this kind of history certainly deserves that. Now, let's go to exercise 1. Reread the article and then, using your own words, give details of the history of Port Royal from 1604 until 1907. You should aim to write a paragraph of 120 to 150 words. Remember to make notes of your main points before writing your final version. That is the exercise that you're supposed to do. And this exercise, as you can see, first of all, you're supposed to come up with the main points, some of which maybe I've not come up with, but this is how the exercise should look like. That is the wickedest city. Port Royal was first a large piece of land on the coast of Jamaica, given to Pierre de Guademons by King Henry IV in 1604. It was given to him under the instructions of forming a French colony with the given land. After a very hard winter and frequent changes of the settlement site, the colony settled at a spot they renamed Port Royal. The settlement grew swiftly and rapidly formed into a city. During the war with the Spanish between 1655 and 1680, Port Royal became a renowned criminal hideout. It was called the richest and the wickedest city in the world. And on the 7th June 1692, an earthquake destroyed the whole city. 3,000 people were lost in this event, which means that they died. Some people referred to as God's punishment on the wicked city. There were numerous attempts to rebuild the city, but some sort of disaster always occurred, namely hurricanes. a fire in 1704, and almost the entire city was destroyed in 1907 by a second earthquake. So you can see clearly that that is summary that is well written, and I believe I need to have an example written by students to show that they've understood the homework that I've given. That is the homework that I've given on page course book, page 101, that is exercise 2, and page 103, that is exercise 3. And then on the workbook, they'll have to work on page 74 and 75. So we look at the workbook. That is an example of summary on the workbook. That is on page 70, as you can see, writing summaries. That is Disneyland opens, and as you can see, I've tried to underline the main points that I'm going to use in my summary, of which I expect the students to do the same. So on July 17th, 1955, Disneyland opened its gate for the very first time. While this was a momentous and historic occasion for Disney, the day did not go quite as planned. Disneyland opening day was referred to by cast members as Black Sunday due to all the problems experienced at the park. So just what exactly went wrong with when Disneyland first opened? As Disneyland opened, workers were still busy trying to get the park ready. Trees were still being planted and some of the paint was still wet. There was also a problem with counterfeit tickets. Over twice the number of invited guests showed up for the opening day festivities, making the park quite crowded. To make matters worse, each park ticket had a designated time to enter the park to prevent overcrowding. But the guests who entered early in the day did not leave after a few hours as expected. So, although guests continued to come in, no one was exiting in the park. As a result of there being more visitors than expected, the restaurants and refreshment stands ran out of food and drinks. The asphalt on Main Street was still wet and women's high heels got stuck in it. Many of the rides broke down on opening day, and some had to be pulled along by cast members. The Mark Twain riverboat was overfull with passengers, and when the crowd moved from one side of the boat to the other to see the sight, the boat began to list and water came over the deck. A few days later, with over 500 guests on board, the Mark Twain almost sank and became stuck in the mud. It was then decided to limit passengers to a capacity of 300 in order to prevent this from happening again. As there had been a plumber's strike during the construction of Disneyland, Walt Disney had to choose between having working toilet facilities or working water fountains on opening day. He chose bathrooms, which was probably a good choice, but as the temperature on the opening day reached over 38 degrees Celsius, guests were hot and thirsty. Because of these problems, many people predicted that the park would not last long. However, Disney and his staff worked hard to correct the faults, and Disneyland went on to become a huge success. It is now considered the happiest place on earth and is visited by millions of guests each year. So now let's go to the question. The question says, by referring to the whole passage, write a summary of what you've learned about 1. The opening of Disneyland. 2. The problems on the opening day and what caused them. You should use your own words and write 170 words to 170 to 200 words. Make notes for your summary here. So as for the notes, this is what I expect from the students. That is how you're supposed to make notes. You are either supposed to number your work or you're supposed to bullet them, whatever the case, so long as you've made your notes. So the first point here regarding the opening of Disneyland, park opened on 17th July 1955, is very important. It was known as Black Sunday because of many problems. Park was unfinished, trees were still being planted, paint Still wet. Counterfeit tickets. Twice the number of invited guests. The park was overcrowded. Restaurants and drink stalls ran out of food. That is a very important point. Asphalt on the main street was still wet and women's high heels got stuck. Mark Twain riverboat almost sank. Plumbers strike. Temperature which was over 38 degrees Celsius. The decision to choose between bathrooms and fountains meant that guests became hot and thirsty. So those are the notes that is actually the notes that are going to help you come up with something like this. So this is the final work, the summary. Disneyland was opened on the 17th July 1955. The opening day was given the name Black Sunday because of the many problems experienced. Some of these problems included wet paints as the park was unfinished, trees being planted as workers continued to work. There was a problem of counterfeit tickets which increased the number of visitors, making the place overcrowded. Food and drinks couldn't be enough for everyone. Women with high heels suffered as well because asphalt on Main Street was still wet. So you will realize that the women heels suffered as well because their heels were stuck because the asphalt on the Main Street was still wet. Mark Twain riverboat almost capsized. That is, it has the same meaning as almost sunk due to overload. There was heat as temperature rose up to 38 degrees Celsius. That is all that I had for you today, and I believe that you've enjoyed the lesson. Thank you and God bless you.